I have the recording going. This is the last Master Gardener training of the season for those of you that haven't heard me say that a million times so far tonight. We are using Slido again one more time this week. So slido.com. The login event code is L163. Your first question is up and active. So please go ahead and answer that question for me. And Kim, it is all yours until I walk back in there.
Up and active where?
On their Slido. On their,
oh, on their,
yeah.
All right. Because I got some who farted looks over here. So, okay, so we're going to talk about landscape management. The fun part about this is, first off, Terry and I have jointly put this together. And I will tell you, after all these years of teaching and doing extension programming, there are people that you can put a presentation together with, and there are people that you can do your piece, and then they do their piece, and you cross your fingers and go, oh, please. Well, ours, we think way too much alike. So you have the group think going on here and how we think about landscape management. And I think one of the primary reasons for that is because we have both managed the landscape in real world situation outside the university, no ivory tower, but then in the university too, which is a little bit of a different ball game. Okay, all right. So we're going to talk about the word management to begin with, even just on the screen. What does the word manage mean? What does it mean? To take care of. To take care of. Agree with that, kind of, sort of? What does the word maintenance mean?
Fix problems.
Fix a problem. What's the difference between maintain and manage? Stabilizing.
Maintaining is preventative and
Management is reactive.
go the other way.
You'd go the other way. Other way. Other way. To maintain a status quo and to manage is to think. And think a little futuristically and a little systems based. So we have to maintain things, right? Which is fixing issues. We have to manage, because if all you do is fix the issue, you may not even know what the real issue is. So we are just sort of deaf on using the word maintenance when it pertains to the landscape. Or do we have a Zoom group chat thing going? Okay, so, okay, you run. Oh. All right, I'm standing over here. Terry's running the thing. Okay, so if you think about what you are currently doing, are you really doing the right thing? Are you practicing what you consider to be practical and good landscape management on your own property? We have a no in the back of the room. Why not? Why do you say that? Why do you think not?
There's a lot of trial and error.
Isn't that a part of learning how to manage? Absolutely. Because if you knew how to do it, I mean, let's start with what we cannot control, right? Think about that. Who doesn't think you're managing very well?
Depends on the year.
Depends on the year. Depends on lots of different things, right? Who wants to manage your landscape properly? Wants to be able to do the right thing all the time, right? All the time. We want it to be absolutely the right thing to do. Well, let's start with Mother Nature, and then let's start with us, and then let's go to things like science changes, right? So, practical landscape management is a monstrous big system to think about. And doing it well requires that combination of instinct, intuition, science, and art all together. Yes? And she's not going to just get to nod and smile.
Especially the art.
Especially the art. And again, in a world and in a department that is heavy on science, technology, engineering, and math, The soft side is actually underpinned by the science. So the art is underpinned significantly by the science. But when I presented to Lancaster County last week on perennials and did sort of an interesting kind of a switch-o change-o on what I usually present, we went through the whole thing on how you should choose and use and came right down to what it is that people who should know what they're doing use as their prime criteria to choose a plant. Had nothing to do with growing environment, had nothing to do with what the plant needed. Color. Color. That would be art in my mind, right? Okay.
Just one extra caveat. We actually went into a high school class a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And we were teaching STEM, and landscape management and landscape design falls into the STEM curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
So if people tell you that it does not, tell them that it does. There is science that backs all of this that we're talking about. So
absolutely. Okay, so good design. So and this is the way we're presenting this is to have you think about the management aspects, and then on the 17th of April or 5th or 4th or sometime, we talk about design. So we're having you think about management first, which might seem a little cattywampus, but hopefully by the time we're finished, you'll understand why we're doing that.
And most people have a landscape to manage initially. You buy a new house, you have this stuff that you have to decide what to do with. So we're going to talk you through kind of, if it's already existing, what do you have? How do you deal with it? What do you need to think about? So that's kind of the process for tonight. And if you have questions, especially the outstate people, put them in the chat box for me, and then we'll definitely go from there.
So we have a couple arrows on the screen, highest to lowest, meaning what? If you look at that, what does that mean to you? Kind of, sort of. Highest input, right? Highest issues associated with management, managing the water, managing the turf if you have it, managing the earth or the soil. Do you have gravel? Do you have pavers with sand joints, or do you have concrete? So, and Terri has an example up here in that image of a grass paver of some sort. So again, a huge piece of the management discussion and plan is how high an input do you want for your management? How much management do you really want to do? And are you capable of doing that, which we'll talk about.
And just as a caveat, those pavers were in Ecuador. So if you're interested in going to the Ecuador program, more information coming soon. That was my commercial.
One flight in and one flight out, just so you know. So if you have a meeting the day you're supposed to get back, don't do that. Don't do that. Okay, so we talk, whether it's design or management, about and a great John Muir quote is, are you in the world or on it? Most people are on the world, not in it. And this is kind of the spin on that. Do you actually look, or do you really see what's going on? Are we all just so focused on being somewhere else, doing something different, that we are not really paying attention to the environment in which we are supposedly functioning? And so what we talk about is always, what do you have to start with? What do you have? That is a fact. That is, you've got it or you don't, right? And the more detail you can think about in defining and describing what you have, the better off you're going to be in being able to figure out how to manage the darn stuff. Then it's, what do you need? Needs get to count. It's your landscape, or it's a landscape that you're responsible for, right? And then what do you want? And you'll notice that we put the words to manage, to manage, to manage. So this is different than I want or I want to. This is, what do you want to manage? What do you want to manage? And then what can you change? What can you change? You cannot change everything. You flat out can't. You cannot move a fence you don't own.
Your house.
Well, you can move your house, but chances are it's going to cost you a lot of money. Okay? But there's so many things you can't change. We cannot change the fact that it's going to snow on Friday after it's been 70 on Thursday. Can't change it, right? Okay? So why should you bother planning at all? I mean, you can't change and you can't fix, and not your day to be queen or mother nature. So you have some choices. You anticipate the absolute best possible situation for your landscape, the absolute best. You think, what do I have? What do I want? What do I need to manage? You anticipate absolutely this would be just the cat's meow. Okay. Then you prepare for whatever the heck happens, right? That would be actual planning to manage as opposed to reactive. And then you're pretty happy in the middle, because so many of those things, this time of year, all of us go out there and think we're a month behind. And this weekend, we have to do everything this weekend, right? Get everything all ready this weekend, which is not true. It's not true. What happens if you miss a year for some stuff? It's probably still going to be there. And if it isn't, maybe you didn't need it to begin with.
Or maybe a little harder to get under control after a year, but
Yeah, especially if it's
still
on
do
the
that.
invasive list. Yeah. Or if you have, this sort of terrible, dreadful ice storm come through, 97 snowstorm, all of us who lived through it and saw the devastation, it's going to happen again. Guess what? It's 20 years later. The generation of students I teach right now look at me and go, huh? It's like, yeah, really, we lost 2,000 trees on campus. So, okay. So we thought, we went back and forth on how you plan for a management plan. And we did. We went back and forth on it. So you can plan by the season, because, we have 4 of them, give or take, right? Depending on how they decide to behave, right? And so we did pros and cons on both. So you plan for spring. This is what you need to manage in the spring. Pros and cons, the seasons are constant. By that, I mean there are 4 of them. I don't mean they start or end when we think they should, but they're pretty close. They're pretty close. Many recommendations that we make for managing living plant material are seasonal. They're based on a season. In the spring, you do this. In the fall, you do that. And you can do some comparative stuff from year to year, just like we were talking about what bloomed when before. When did you get to cut back? When did you have to stop pruning? Then the negatives are, your turn.
Well, you never know when it's going to snow or when it's going to hail. We've had snow the first week of May for the past 3 years. So all of those tender spring flowers that we all love, like the magnolias, they usually bit the dust as soon as that snow came. The timing could be off. How many times have we really had a true long spring? It goes from winter to spring for like 1 week, and then it's 90 till September. So unless you're at the state fair, and then it's cold. So too early, too late. Just the magnolia is a perfect example. Everybody loves on the eastern part of the state those magnolias. I don't know an example on the western part of the state, sorry, but those ones that we just crave to have and are so beautiful, but a season going to be off. Management is consistent. Maybe not. There are some management that is consistent in the spring. Knowing that you need to cut back your spring blooming flowers because those are going to set buds, and you're going to be cutting them off if you go too late, i.e. lilac. That's always one that is consistent. And then management, it does ignore seasons because Mother Nature is Mother Nature.
And there are some things that truly are not season dependent. So Terri gave the example of magnolias in the east, shrub roses all over the state. And that would be too early, too late can cause damage. Too early in the spring causes serious damage. My students in my pruning class pruned our 2 roses in the backyard farmer garden last night, because this is technically the last pruning class. It's an 8-week class. It is way too early to prune the roses. And if you prune them too early in the fall or too late in the summer, however you want to think about it, exactly the same thing. You get that kind of damage. It doesn't matter where you are in the state or for that kind of thing to happen. So that is a con. I'm thinking, okay, it's spring, I need to prune the roses. Okay, so then we talked about planting by category instead. So we got the seasons hanging up there, and then we have the category. And simple categorization, very simple. So the pros are you can focus your attention on a category. You might not have all those categories to have to manage. And we'll talk about what those are in a second. It is easier to wrap your hands around it if it's categorized, and your head, probably. Easier to prioritize a weekend task. So it's not you stand out there and then you go into Scarlett O'Hara mode because it's, I can't think about that. I have too much to do. I'm going to go back in the house. Categories can change and should change as your landscape changes. And what's in the category can change. So, and then the cons are the categories can change and what's in the category can change, right? So when we talk about categories, what do we figure out?
So we figured out,
And this is us.
Slide. No. We figured out categories were like just how you learn from Master Gardener class. It's turf, it's trees, it's shrubs, it's herbaceous, it's soil, it's water. So just very basic, what you would consider as a category in your landscape.
So you have trees or you don't. You have raised beds or you don't. You have turf or you don't. So you can think about those all by themselves.
So the Panhandle did chime in, and thank you very much, Gary. They have seasons they're dry and windy, or windy and dry.
And except when we go to Scotts Bluff, which means it's going to snow one way or the other. And it has done that for 15 years, and it's going to do it again this year. Thank you very much, Gary. Okay. So if you plan by both the category and the season, the category is first, and then you overlay the season on top of it. And that's maybe sounds a little more complicated than it is, but you think, all right, I've got shrubs. Who has shrubs in their landscape? Most people, right? Okay, so I have shrubs in my landscape. I'm going to concentrate. I'm going to think about managing my shrubs in the spring. Which ones do I have to do what to? I have turf. What am I going to do with my turf in the summer? So that's a way to think about that. And you adjust based on Mother Nature, your time commitment, what you actually have. You have to set priority. And I'm just absolutely the worst in my own landscape. I absolutely know what that task is going to be. And then I go outside. And an hour and a half later, oh yeah, I was going to do that, wasn't I? Now it's dark. So, okay. So it's time and capabilities are absolutely important too. What time do you have and want to spend? When we talk about management and we teach students like yourselves how to manage, starting with design, one of the real red flags for complicated design is somebody who absolutely is either not going to do their own management or does not know how to do it, or has no clue on how long it takes. 45 minutes per shrub rose is what it took for, and that was a pretty good conservative estimate per shrub rose, one shrub rose, to get them cleaned back up again. About 15 minutes per shrub rose if you've kept up every single year. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot unless you have 16 of them. And, you have to take 4 trips to emergency care in the meantime because you ran a thorn through your finger. Okay, so then we categorize. So here's our categories that we came up with. And these are pretty much in priority order in terms of significance. So the environment, what is the environment in which you are functioning? Your environment. You can start with the big, broad macro, you go to the micro, it's your place. That new house out way south of Pine Lake Road in the middle of nowhere with nothing is a whole different environment than right smack in the heart of town. Whole different environment. And we do soils and slopes because what is that soil? What is that slope? Water, the woody stuff, the herbaceous stuff, the turf, and we use turf actually as turf, not as a ground cover. Annuals, if you're an annual person, wildlife, and then the hardscape and the constructed elements. So when we think about managing each of those elements and putting together a management plan, that's what we have in mind. So we're going to break it down a little bit here and go into a little more detail. And again, if you have questions, we just want them asked, right?
Yes.
Yes. At any old time.
Ask, put them in the chat box. So this is a very hands-on approach. And we actually have Elizabeth sending me the questions because I can't see them here. So
That's why her phone, she's really not on Facebook on her phone.
So the first thing we always have to start with is soil. Everything grows in the soil. Everything is developed in the soil. But you have to know what kind of soil you have. So when we go through soil class, we talk about what kind you have. So when we do soils, we'll learn that. But know what kind you have. Figure it out. Use the soil triangle. Do you need to improve it? Do you need to add compost? Is it compacted? Do you need fertilizer? Do you need to put cover crops on it? What are you going to plant in it? Are you going to put sidewalk down? So you got to figure it all out before you even start. But if you're going to start planting, you need to get a soil test.
And even if you're not going to start planting and you haven't done one and you're thinking, all right, I really want to manage my property at that 95% level, old soil, old neighborhood, old crappy soil, crummy soil, bad soil, horrible soil in new neighborhood. If you don't know what it is, you're in trouble with it. And then you may, in fact, go into, oh, geez, Louise, I listened to a great ad. I'm going to add X to my soil. And some of the other popular additives that is on there on purpose, because what is one of the most popular additives? Gypsum. What's another? Lime, what's another one? That one's actually a good guy, usually, sometimes. I'm thinking of something you buy. Well, you buy fertilizer, hello. But like a organic thing. Manure's a good one as long as it's not fresh out of the back end. Peat moss. Peat moss. I hear it every single week on some ad in Lincoln. Oh, you can amend your soil with peat moss. Okay then. All right then. Not going to do that. So you have to be careful with those kinds of things.
So in your packet, we decided that after each big group, we are actually going to put your references on here. So as we go through, you'll have your references. So it should be a really good thing to come back to. So pretty much everything that's in your Master Gardener handbook, a few backyard farmer YouTube videos that, heck, I've got to promote backyard farmer every once in a while. So,
and if you go back to that one for a second, just for the picture. So that picture is classic for soil and water and environment, and that lovely interaction when we have 5 inches of rain on an exposed site, even with a silt fence of some sort, and then the damage that is done. And that falls into that category of you anticipate the best for your growing environment, that soil situation, and then you plan for the worst, and then you have to fix and hope and do all that together. Okay, so slopes are also one of the things that people they don't think about it. And the slope is essentially the modifier. Okay, what is the degree of the slope? What is the direction of the slope? Is it this? Is it this? Is it north facing, south facing? What is it? And directly associated with the type of soil you have and the condition of that soil. Is it stable? Is it covered? Is it an accessible slope? And I mean accessible for you as you're thinking about your management. Are you going to have to walk up the hill, with one leg like this, or sit down on your rear to slide to the bottom? Are you going to be able to get equipment? Are you going to be able to mow it if you're mowing? What is the accessibility? The other one is, what is your neighbor's slope? Because guess what? They get to do what they want to do to the property line, not really supposed to change the direction of water or any of that, but it happens all the time. So if you're at the bottom of the hill, or you're at the top, one way or the other, okay? Those are very important things that we don't think about. And again, just walking through neighborhoods, this is the kind of thing you see all the time, which is, you know, the ways of water and the soil and the slope, pure and simple.
So we had a question, why not use peat moss?
Anybody want to answer that? Take a guess.
It just collapses.
Well, it's very like stuffy, right? It's like stuff, yes. It's acid. Depending on where the peat moss came from, it's out of the peat bogs, which are endangered. Most importantly, I mean, if the recommendation is amend with peat moss, how the heck do you know you need peat moss if you haven't done the soil test? I have yet in all of my ancientness to ever use peat moss in my landscape, and my landscape's pretty much just fine the way it is. So it's expensive. It's not an additive that actually adds a great deal to the landscape. Compost, hands down, is the best in terms of soil health. Okay, so then water is the same thing. How much water do you have? So remember, we're going back to what do you have, and how much do you get? So both of those again, now we're talking drainage and runoff. There comes that slope and there comes the soil. What is the location of what is happening? What's going which direction? What is the quality of that water running off? Either from your own or running off or running on. You know, is it carrying things with it, silt, or you have a neighbor who
Over fertilizes
exactly,
his lawn.
right, or does weed stuff, granular weed stuff. Okay, so, and the real ideas with water, of course, are you protect your own landscape space, you protect that water, you direct its movement, you preserve what you can. So keeping it on your property sounds pretty simple.
Yeah.
But
Well, it is simple, but there are ways to preserve it.
right.
Make sure that you have your downspouts directed not towards a hard surface where it'll run straight down into the sewer lines, but onto a permeable space where turf or patio that you have pavers on or what have you. If you were in the Keim courtyard, we could show you where we're collecting rainwater off of the roof into our pond. So we're filling our pond with rainwater. Our rain barrels is another really good way to keep property on your water, on your property. The only thing that you have to remember when you're collecting water from rain barrels is you do not want to apply that to your vegetable gardens. You really only want to keep that in any kind of non-edible garden situation.
And do you know why? Let me tell you the story of the turkey vulture. Which would be, if I had a rain barrel, which I don't because mine's all directed into my landscape, and I would have had it attached to the downspout for mostly the roof with a slope like this. And I would have not happened to have had a son who's tall enough to stand in the yard and kind of see onto that slope. I would have been putting onto my vegetable garden rainwater that had in it the remains of a dead turkey vulture, which was on my roof. So raccoon poop, possum poop, squirrel poop,
Bird poop,
shingle dust. You don't want any of that stuff in your rain barrel. So then and again, the redirecting of downspouts, if you haven't done that or you think you can't afford to do that or you aren't paying attention, every single time it rains, I go outside and figure out where stuff's going because our basement's always wet. And it doesn't matter what I do, our basement's always wet. There's something going through the neighborhood. But sure helps to put on the downspouts and redirect. Okay. And then the inputs thing. That's a big one.
Yeah, you definitely want to make sure that when you're mowing, you're collecting the clippings that are not going on the sidewalk, brushing them back onto the turf. You don't want them running off. If you are not redirecting, or they're coming off the sidewalk into the sewer system, off the hard surfaces. Your fertilizers, you don't want it to go off into the hard surfaces. So you really want to be very cognizant of where that water goes, what's on your hard surfaces, and where those items would go if there is a rain or snow or any kind of sprinkler system, irrigation system, overwatering onto the sidewalks or what have you.
So there's the water. Then we go into bioswales. So, you know, that's the fancy word for a little ditch that's got plants in it and water runs through it. Pretty simple. And that's really, and they're so simple on even on a small, your own property. Just, you know, your hand goes like this, but imagine that being your land to direct water and to keep it flowing the direction it should go. Rain gardens themselves, who has a rain garden? The rest of the state, I assume some of you do too. Rain gardens, and the city of Lincoln now has its cost share program going again, if you haven't seen it. I think it's up to $2,000, as I recall, to be able to cost share if you want to do something that is that sort of a plan. Ponds, here's the deal on managing bioswales. Like it or not, one of the simple things in a bioswale or in a swale is turf, as long as those slopes are not too steep, because you can mow it. You can mow it and keep it looking clean and tidy, or you can use a turf that doesn't need mowing or a ground cover type. Rain gardens can be as simple or as complex as you want. The tricky part on managing a rain garden is one that has woody plant material in it, if you are not doing your own management. Because if somebody else is and it's time to cut everything back, guess what also might get cut all the way back? Everything in there, if you're not paying attention.
They're very good at holding things too.
Yes.
So leaves,
Trash.
grass clippings, trash, yes.
Small creatures.
Yes.
Now, ponds, there should be a pond anonymous, because it is year-round management is required. Truthfully, year-round management is required in some form. You got to have at least 60%. You can get away with 40, but you're going to have to keep your eyes on it. It's shaded in some fashion. So that's trees. That's another reason to plant that tree that you're all going to plant. Surface water lilies, those sorts of things. Fish and critters add to the management. Why? They poop. And they do that sex thing.
And they eat.
And then there's more of them. And you have to feed them, and they eat your plants, which, you know, is either a good thing or a bad thing. Are you going to use chemicals? So Terri essentially is, you know, pond manager for our Kime Hall pond, and we started with chemicals, and that was
Well, we tried not to use chemicals.
Right.
However, our pond cannot be 60% plus covered because we do have critters in our pond, and our critters eat anything that we put in there to shade the water.
and the trees aren't big enough
And
yet.
the trees
Sooner or
aren't big
later.
enough.
Yeah.
And they probably, hopefully, will never be big enough before I'm gone. So,
Yeah.
but
Somebody else is going to have to haul them out of the courtyard when they die.
So if you don't have that covered, you're going to have algae. And algae is a big issue. People do not want algae in their ponds, their small ponds. It is very unsightly, but it's very hard to control. You can control it with chemicals. There are ways that you can purchase chemicals. There are some chemicals that you cannot have animals in that you're using, but there are some chemicals that are critter safe. So both fish and turtles. But you have to make that decision. And it does get costly.
And it's what, 5 or 6 times a year you had to put the chemical
Yep.
in?
Yep. It starts when basically when the temperature starts going up, the algae starts blooming at about 58 degrees. So the water temperature, 58 degrees. So you have a long season in Nebraska where that algae is going to be active, because then it doesn't stop till it gets below 58 degrees. So just think about how long it takes for that water to warm up and how long it takes for that water to cool back down. So
the other thing you actually end up with, plants is on there too, and you're going to end up with plants you don't want, like cattails. We did not plant the cattails in the courtyard, and they will ruin a liner just like that. And you you know, some of the worst invasive species we have are aquatic plants. Right now, they're looking at even some of the ones that are totally not hardy here as a watch it, because they're finding that things like water hyacinth, which we think of as a Florida terrible thing, is actually a zone that's showing up in zone 6AB south of here and overwintering. So it's starting to get a little scary.
You
Yeah.
can get unwanted critters. If you do have fish, you could be getting raccoons, you could be getting snakes that are eating your fish. I can handle the raccoons, just no snakes. But you know, water is very soothing. Most people love to have water in their garden somehow.
But do
So
know that it's a
don't-
commitment.
Don't turn
Yeah.
this, let us turn this away from you, but you, in a management plan, know that water, especially a pond, is very time consuming, and it will be a year-round job.
And if you have a contained water thing, it's less time consuming, but it's still, I mean, the pump has to work. You have to clean the thing out. Mine, the bottom of it finally failed. So I have to figure out if I really want one or not, because the water just goes in and goes right out. It's not exactly what I had in mind.
So your landscape, you also have to, you know, when it comes to water, you do have to irrigate. You have to decide how you're going to irrigate and what kind of system that you have. Are you just hauling around hoses and sprinklers? Do you actually have an underground system in? And where does that underground system go to? And what kind of heads are on that underground system?
And is it zoned?
Is it zoned? Do you know what time it comes on? Do you know what time it goes off? How long it's running? Or are you just using soaker hoses? So you have to know all of those when you start thinking about irrigation.
How much water are you adding? So people really don't pay any attention to how much water their plants are getting, especially in a landscape that is already established. We think it's rained. If you go stand under the canopy of a big tree, that soil can be absolutely bone dry, and it might have been raining all night. And again, we tend as human beings to think, oh, it rained last night, everything is good. So knowing, again, this goes back to knowing what you have, the environment, the specific environment in every little bit and piece of your corner of your property. Under an evergreen, for heaven's sakes, you know, you really have to water under an evergreen if you're going to re-soak, that kind of thing. And honestly, one of the best irrigation systems there is like this. It's either your thumb on the end of the hose or it's a water wand on the end of the hose. Why do I say that? A, you control it, and B, what are you doing while you're watering? Hopefully, you're not on your phone. You're paying attention. You're saying, oh my goodness, I had no idea that phlox plant bugs just attacked David, my phlox. But there you are watering, and there they go scattering. So, you know, think about that. But again, it's a different issue in terms of your input for irrigation.
You also have to know when you're irrigating. So are you know, is that system turning on early enough that your plants are going to be dried by mid-afternoon, or is it not coming in till late in the afternoon? So you're going to have potential of water sitting on leaves all night long, potential of disease, potential of issues throughout the season, just maximizing every time you water. So you definitely know when that irrigation is happening. Obviously, you can't control when it rains. So if it rains overnight or in the middle of the day and your plants go into the night wet because it rained, there's nothing you can do about it. You're not going to go out there with a fan and try to dry everything off. But definitely know when you're irrigating. And you know that tuna can thing that everybody talks about? Yeah, it does work. So go out and figure out actually how much water you're putting on.
With the overlap. Rain sensors are now required on irrigation systems in the city of Lincoln. So if you're upgrading or putting a new one in, or you have an ancient old one that doesn't have a backflow preventer that meets code, you're going to get to do that one too, which is a good idea. Yeah. Okay, so conserving water, again, mulch, and there's a part of the list with mulch, all the things you can use, and we did add inorganic at the bottom, stones, rocks, those kinds of things, because there are some plants even in the eastern part of the state, that absolutely do not want to have an organic mulch around their crown. In the western part of the state, their dry soil or chips of stone are a scree kind of a thing, is really it's what they grow in. A lot of the native plants that are central and western Nebraska, that is what they want. And so essentially a big piece of landscape management is we can love it to death. Oh gosh, we must mulch. We must mulch this plant. It will be so much happier. Well, it's not. You just killed it. Okay? All right.
So we are about the right time.
Yeah?
Yeah, actually we are. So what we're going to do is on your Slido, so those of you that are doing Slido, which I will have to run back into my office and switch to the next question. But I want you to tell us what your plant tag does. So those of you that are using Slido, anybody in my campus group doing Slido? A couple of you? Okay. So we'll do that and you can keep talking.
Okay, I'm going to apparently keep talking. And she's going to do some Slido thing.
So you can talk about how they're going to do this.
Okay, so Terry, do they all have this?
There's 2 per table in my group.
Okay, so on campus, you've each got one of these. Now, I will tell you that so one of the things I absolutely cannot do, it's a sickness. I cannot give the same presentation twice. I just can't do it. And so when I talk at Lancaster County, they want perennials one year, they'd like design another year. I'll do the same thing for Elizabeth on the 19th of March. So I thought, all right, let's do something a little different here. And it involved plant tags. So what we're doing with you is sort of a spin-off of what I did with them. And what you have is a sheet of plant tags. And these are just various tags that I pulled and Terry found. And what we want you to do is talk about and then converse with and then answer that Slido on what is the tag telling you. Now I want you, as you're reading these, because we did copy the front and back, if there was a front and back, or like the very first one is the Monrovia tag and it's a fold over in the front and the back. We want you to think about what does it really tell you as a person who is potentially you either have this plant or you want this plant, and you're going to have to manage this plant. So what does the tag tell you? That's what we want you to do on these, okay?
So either work, so those of you that are
Guys need one of
in
these?
the other counties,
You need one?
work in a group. I want you to write down what you can in the chat box, and we will go through all that. Or you can put it in the Slido. So that is also your Slido question. So
that is a kind of a generalized, in all of these tags, what kind of information shows up, sort of deal.
So yeah, the question is that this is a generalized what shows up in these tags.
Right.
And the answer is yes. What do you see in these tags that will help you manage that plant in your landscape?
So what is the information that tag is telling you? And there's lots of different examples.
Answer.
Yep. Pile through them and see what you see. I can go find them.
So I'm able to put the chat box up on the screen here in campus now. So there's a couple questions. The plant tags is a 6-page extra handout that was in the box account where all of your handouts were. So those coordinators out there, if you're interested in running to get that. Hardiness zone is one thing that people are finding, and how large the plant gets, the water, the sun needs. We had a question in the chat box as to what our heat zone is, and neither one of us knew that. So we had to go find a map. We are in zone 7 for the heat zone. 5 for the cold zone, 7 for the heat zone.
So why do you not see heat zone on your tags? Who uses heat zones? Not us. Why not? Well, a couple of reasons. First off, our actual zone maps are USDA science, right? This is American Horticultural Society, which is fine, but they're also backwards. So we think of zone 1 being cold and zone 10/11 being warm. These go the other way. So it's like, oh, wait a minute here. We can't be zone 7 because that would be Oklahoma City. So we think of it differently. I don't know of anybody who uses these, truth be known. So, but that's what it is. We're 60 to 90, which is like, yeah, right. We've been 112.
I have been seeing more tags that have a heat zone.
Yeah.
A lot of times a plant has to go through a dormant time or a freeze time.
Yeah.
And since HGTV came out, and everybody wants everything that grows on HGTV. If it's growing in the south, it needs like a lilac that needs a cold dormant time, they can't grow lilacs down there.
Tulips are another example.
Tulips are another example. I was in North Carolina last year in April, and they had tulips all over the place. And these two girls were running all over the place going, oh, tulips, tulips. They were taking pictures. And I was like, what the heck? They're just tulips. I forgot they're from Florida, and they can't grow tulips there. So I was like, oh, okay.
So the way the heat zone map works, just so you know, is that it is the average number of days per year above 86 degrees. Average number of days per year above 86 degrees. Now, why they landed on 86 has to do with actually plant growth response to hot temperatures. And zone 7 is 60 to 90 days over 86. That sounds a little high, doesn't it?
3 months.
Is that the daily high or the average?
Average number of days per year, and it doesn't say, yeah,
Where
per
it just
year.
goes over.
Just goes over 60 to 90 in zone 7. Zone 6 is the northern part of the state, and that would be 45 to 60. So there you go, heat zones.
Yeah. Sure.
Sliders?
Heat zone is 7. But the actual real zone that we're in is 5D, which is the cold. USDA zone is 5.
You guys a couple more minutes to look over those tags, and then we will kind of go through what you have found on the tag, both in Slido and in the chat box, and then we will take a break. So look at your tags for about 2 more minutes. The recording is back on and I'm running back into the other room. We had a couple questions come in during the break. One question is there a certain type of mulch you would recommend for plants versus trees or shrubs? And I think after talking about the labels, it depends on what that plant is.
So if we're just being general and basic and not talking about plants that really need that dry environment, a really good shredded or chipped hardwood mulch is going to work for both. You don't want the really, really, really fine shreddy stuff because it mats down and forms what we call a mulch pizza. And it will literally, you can pick up a sheet of it like a pizza. So if it's too fine like that, if it's too big and thick and chunky, then you've got a little bitty plant in there and you've got a big old chunk of bark. But I'm just a fan of hardwood mulch. I really am.
Okay, that was the only question we had.
Oh, good. That
So-
means they were really happy, busy, or they were on break.
They're probably on break. So,
Okay, so now we're going to talk about the bones. And this again goes back to what do you have? The trees and shrubs are the bones of your landscape. So if you're in a brand new location and you got nothing, you need some good bones. And if you're in an older landscape, you've probably got some bones that are beginning to break. So you've got to identify what you've got to begin with. And you have to know what it is, because if you don't know what it is, you don't understand what it needs, even if it's been there for 50 or 60 years. And again, you think about what it had when it needed it. Does it still have what it needs? What are its pests? What is its projected lifespan? And again, you can read all the books you want, and this is Nebraska. And so, but things do have a genetic end. Is it a short-lived, a medium? Is it a long-lived plant? What is its actual age, give or take? The condition it's in at present. Both, again, the critical is a tree that is potentially a hazard. Less critical is a shrub, a big old shrub of some sort. What was the quality when it was planted? Now, you may not have a clue on the big stuff, but certainly on newer things. And that, again, is so essential. Where was it grown? How was it grown? How was it handled? What is the root mass like? All of those things. Was it allowed to dry out on the parking lot and then it got watered? That makes a big difference. And again, how was it managed previously? My beloved next door neighbor who passed away, the people who bought her house completely changed the management. Stop pruning entirely. It is completely a different place than it was. What is its location? The people who planted in our house planted an upright white spruce 1 foot off the corner of the garage. Now it's still there, those of you thinking about cutting down an ash, because that is the tree the cardinals fly into before they go to the feeder. But how does it contribute to the landscape? That's really what you're after. Is it your plant or is it their plant? Because if it's their plant and it shades your property, you're toast. Okay? What is the impact of all your plants on or of other categories on your plants? So the impact of those plants on other categories in your landscape, or the other categories on the plant, turf to trees as an example. What are the companions that it lives with? Are there other plants around it, or is it all by itself? Are they zoned together? And attitudes in quotes on a purpose, because that attitude is yours. What is your attitude about what you've got, what those bones are? Do you love it or do you hate it? do you keep it just because, or do you you wanted to get rid of it for so darn long you can't even stand it, you just won't do it. Okay? Okay,
So what do you want to manage? Where do you want to manage it for? Where is it at? Know what you want. Is there going to be compaction? Are you going to be compacting that soil? Know what your footpath is, where you're planting those trees or shrubs, or if they already exist. Are you walking, through the middle of a companion grouping of plants to get to your shed? Are you compacting those roots even more so they could potentially be more stressed when we have a drought or we're in a flood or what have you? Again, we've emphasized this a couple times already. What does it look like? Is it nutrient deficient of some reason? Go get a soil test. You can kind of read a plant by what those leaves say, but you may or may not be right. It could be various things. I've seen some plants that look like they were nutrient deficient, but they actually just had bad roots, or they were overwatered, or something else. So go get a soil test to make sure that you know what you're doing. You need to mulch. And we had that question, what do you mulch with? The best mulch is hardwood mulch. It's the most expensive. It adds nutrients back into your soil. It keeps your soil cool. It keeps your roots cool. It keeps your soil moist, but not wet. If you get the dog vomit that we get calls in for Backyard Farmer every year, just go out there with a rake and rake it over. It's not going to do anything. It's just decomposing. Make sure that you do not put the mulch up against the tree trunks. That's just asking for and inviting critters, especially in the wintertime, to get into the bark and start girdling some of your either trees or shrubs.
and again, in the western part of the state or with plants that are truly drought, they really don't want to be wet. You mulch differently. We're talking trees and shrubs, and again, the whole point here is you manage where it is. So the picture on there is our incredibly beautiful silver linden over on the east side of the dairy store, being managed for exactly that tree in exactly that spot. Underneath it, nothing is growing and nothing will. The pruning has been not great, but that's okay in this case. You don't manage that tree for either being a different tree than a linden or being in a different location. So that's very, very important to think about as you're putting your management plan together.
You also have to know the shape of the tree.
Yeah.
So for an example, I have a little leaf linden in my backyard. Well, the people that lived there before, they limbed it clear up. I mean, it's 12 foot off the ground. I would never limb a linden up that high because they have such beautiful, graceful limbs. I would have let it come down, but this one in the picture is an example of proper height. But know what that tree is supposed to look like. Go online and find those good sources to figure out what that plant's supposed to look like when it's mature.
Right. And if it's already mature, know what it's going to look like as it ages, as it begins to lose its lower limbs, typically. You're going to manage it differently.
So here's a good little chart out of Minnesota that if you have something newly planted, this is kind of an example of what you would need to water to get those plants established. We get that question asked all the time. We're going back to our group of water that we had, our category water and irrigation. Know how much irrigation is going on. You need to be able to figure that out. But I don't think most people, when they plant, actually water sufficiently for those new plants. So after 2 weeks, you should be out there watering daily. So.
And a big piece of this, again, if you go all the way back to what do you already have, if you have smaller, younger plants within the root zone or the canopy of bigger plants, big ones are going to take what they need first. And if those smaller things, either you're reestablishing or you're doing something different, you're really going to have to pay attention. They can dry out overnight underneath the canopy because the other roots take what they need.
I also wanted to show in this chart the establishment time. And I want you to look at the caliper, the inches diameter of those trees or shrubs, and look at how long it takes for them to establish. So if you have a 1-inch caliper tree, the root's not going to be established for 1.5 years, and you're supposed to be watering 1 to 1.5 gallons each time. And look at the 6-inch caliper tree. Now this is obviously going to get spaded in. You're going to have a big piece of machine to bring in a 6-inch caliper tree.
And you're not going to do it.
But just look at how long it's going to take to get that tree established. So one of the other management things that we always talk about is buy small. It's less expensive, easier to manage at the beginning. You're usually going to get a better establishment, earlier establishment. That 6-inch caliper tree is going to sit there for 9 to 10 years and do absolutely nothing. It won't grow. It's just continually establishing its roots. That's all it's doing. So it's just going to kind of sit there.
So again, I mean, the huge thing is to think, if you know the source of things you already have, that's very important. If you don't know the source and you're buying something new, as Terry said, we have a couple of growers in the state, and we have some retail locations now that are selling plants where the root system has been grown properly. So. Okay, pruning. I teach an entire class on this. Eric North, who is our new dendrologist, teaches an entire class on this. So here's the quick and the dirty on pruning, which is what do you have to prune for what reasons? The first reason is always safety. If it's going to fall on your head, somebody ought to prune it off. If you're going to back out of the driveway and run over somebody's small grandchild, you need to do some pruning. People tend to prune too much in the wrong seasons with the wrong tools. And that is a huge management issue that will impact long-term the health of any plant. Okay, dead and diseased material is the first thing you should take out after you consider safety. All the dead and diseased stuff. And again, a part of that is knowing the difference between what is diseased and what is not. Majority of our pruning in this part of the country is during the dormant season. And you know, the scratch test, the bud test, the does it look different test, you need to think about those before you start sort of indiscriminately lopping things off. Sometimes you can manage diseases and pests, and there's a couple of caveats to that. One is you manage a lot of diseases by opening up the canopy or the crown. Again, I talk about roses as a primary example. Thin the interior so you don't have that great, wonderful, humid, no air movement environment for diseases like black spot. Okay, other diseases absolutely cannot be managed by pruning, and in fact, you will spread the disease if you don't know what you're doing. Aesthetics, this is size and form, and this is very personal. And there are people who really want to have their plants managed as though they're architectural elements. That's your choice. But my suggestion always from a management standpoint is understand what you are going to need to do before you walk down that path. Because once you start, you're going to have to keep it up, or you're going to have to take a number of years to let it grow out of whatever you have shaped it into. So
it's like a bad haircut.
It is.
Remember
Takes
when
a
you got
little
it
while.
all chopped off? It took a while for it to grow
All
back.
chopped off. Takes a long darn time for the stuff to grow back in. And producing a strong plant is huge. So you're going to hopefully, again, if your plants were pruned properly when they were young, but if not, and you have new ones, your goal should be to produce a strong plant with the pruning. Renewing and rejuvenating is a whole different category. The ones you can cut to the ground, and we don't really mean that. We mean down like here, and they will come out of it. And the ones you cannot. Whether you have to cane them out by a third, by a third, or by a third, how old they are, remember that, how old is it and what conditions it's in, that makes a big difference for that.
For those of you that can't see Kim's hands, it's about 18 inches.
Sorry, Scotch Bluff or Grand Island. Okay, and then influence fruiting for those of you who have fruit trees. Okay, pruning is one of the ways that we actually stimulate fruit production or make it more healthy. So you're talking about what category are you in? Are you evergreen, deciduous, broadleaf evergreen, a vine, a shrub, suffrutescent plant? That's your category. Then what season is it? And then what is your timing for making those pruning cuts? We don't prune during leaf on, and we're pretty darn close. We don't prune in leaf off, which is in the fall. We can do some things in the summer, and in fact, some species are actually better pruned in the summer. Some diseases are managed only if you prune truly dormant, and one of those is oaks. We do not prune oaks after March 1st, and we do not prune them prior to October 1st. Okay?
So, do you need to fertilize trees and shrubs? Does anybody have a guess? No.
Not
Very
if
good.
what? Not if what? What has to be good?
Your
Soil.
soil has to be good.
Yep.
So, what needs what and when? So definitely know, if you are putting any kind of fertilizer on there, if you're doing fruit production, if you're, in some kind of situation, definitely know what it needs and when you need to apply it. So that timing again. Inspect the trees. So is your tree coloring early? Is the leaf size smaller than it has been for the past couple years? Is it not growing as much? Was it putting on a foot of new growth a year and now it's only putting on 6 inches? It's really important to get out into your landscape and investigate in your landscape and walk around and see this and keeping a journal. I'm terrible at that, but keeping a journal and making sure that you're keeping notes on that is always very good. Knowing where that plant came from and why. So the tree in the picture is one that's been used in Kim's presentations for years, and I think she got it from Rock, actually. No?
Mine.
Okay.
Very
well.
much mine.
Well, he's used it too then. But this tree, do you know what time of year this is? Anybody? Fall? Yeah, it's July.
July.
Yeah.
July. Yeah. It's a maple. It's going into fall color.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think it came out and it was major root issues
Went in too big at the wrong season, came out
and overwatered.
overwatered.
If you can kind of see, if you can get close enough to your screen, you can see the 3 tree anchors holding that tree into the ground, not anchored correctly, lots of issues on that. So make sure that it's not an environmental issue. Make sure that, not a late frost before you start adding fertilizers. Again, it's what is that plant? What is the season? And then what is the timing?
And
So
remember,
it's very important.
And remember, especially on the timing, the whole point is to stimulate the right kind of growth at the right time. And stimulating trees and shrubs to start growing in August and September is a way bad idea.
You also have to remember timing as to, for the example that we'd used earlier, is the lilac.
Mhm.
You grow lilacs because the flowers are beautiful and fragrant, and that's always that first spring thing that's really memorable. But if you pruned it in September, you're going to prune all of the new buds off and you're not going to have any flowers next spring.
And then if you fertilize, you're actually stressing that plant even further. You
So-
pruned and now you fertilized.
So we have a question here.
The proper time to trim things in a winter kill, like boxwood.
So the proper time to trim things that have winter killed, such as boxwood.
You're talking about a broadleaf evergreen to begin with.
4 or 5 inches
Oh.
of white.
Oh, I know. Oh, I know. Believe me, I know. And the time to prune any broadleaf evergreen for winter damage is about Mother's Day. Absolutely, because this is one of those too early things. If you prune too early and we get a 50-degree swing in temperature, or we drop below freezing, or we hold below freezing, what you've done is you have actually opened up that stem, and you're going to get additional dieback. Mhm.
What about holly?
Same thing. Absolutely same thing.
So the question
Yeah.
was, what about holly too? So any broadleaf evergreen
Yeah.
would be the same.
And the
So-
holly, one of the things you're going to have to also really be careful of is they set their flower buds on previous year's wood, which means that those flower buds they're in the leaf axils. So if you do any pruning down into those flower buds, you're going to reduce your fruiting.
So the question came in from Dakota County. Should you wait to cut the dead out until winter instead of when you see it?
Of what kind of a plant?
I don't know.
So if it's a broadleaf evergreen, I'd probably still wait.
A tree.
A tree. Okay, so that's a good question. Should you cut the dead out when you see the dead? And again, depending on whether it's a safety issue, yes. Moving dead and diseased material at any time is a better idea than allowing it to stay. So, I mean, it's easier to see it when it's dormant. Typically, if it's a deciduous tree, it's a little harder. Sometimes you can see it in the summer better because you see something without foliage on it. Evergreens are another ball game, a whole different ball game for pruning.
One of the other things about deciduous trees, though, is you can see the structure
Right.
in the wintertime when there are no leaves.
Right.
So sometimes it's better to see the crossing branches and all those kinds of things in the wintertime. So there are people that actually go out and put little flags
Mhm.
on either the dead if they want to wait and do a dormant pruning, or they flag it with a flag to cut it in the spring. So depending on what they want to do.
Mhm.
So that's one thing you can do.
And if you're pruning fruit trees, your window's closed. Pretty darn closed already.
And fruit trees are.
Whole nother ballgame.
When should you prune a yew? So that's from Platte County.
So yews fall into the category of too early, too late again. If you prune them too early and we get that winter abrupt temperature change, you can get a little bit of a stub dieback. So you're better off with the yews to wait late April if you possibly can. Absolutely. So yews, broadleaf evergreens of any sort.
Remember, we've had snow in May
Right.
the past 3 years.
And
So-
it's, if it's 30, 35 and it's been 40, 45, that's a whole different thing than it's 70 and then it's 20. And that's what causes the damage. So, okay. So now we're still talking trees and shrubs. Good planting techniques are really important. And again, this is a piece of management. So if you are purchasing or somebody is planting for you, the roots themselves I don't care what the top looks like pretty much, truth be known. Top has to be decent for a tree, but it's the root systems that's the most important thing. $100 pole for a $10 plant, shallower than the root mass itself in the part of the state where we have heavier clay soils. You don't have to go quite as high out of the ground in the parts of the state where the soils will drain more readily. Many of our trees and shrubs are very easily established in the fall of the year as the temperatures drop as opposed to going into that deadly heat of the summer. But there are windows in which we plant. And those windows, again, are dependent on the plant category that you're talking about. We stake trees for what reason? Keep them upright, keep them straight. Wind. We're trying to keep the root ball in the ground. People who think we're staking the top, that would be to keep the tree from running away. We don't do that. Nope. It's to keep the root mass in the ground. And again, a huge issue with management occurs if the stakes are left on too long and the staking materials are not proper. And it can happen in less than a single year. So keep that one in mind. We've talked about mulch already again. but the extension of the mulch to the drip line, if at all possible. Now on a tree that's 50 feet across, you probably don't want to mulch your whole front yard. But you might have to, because if you can't grow turf under there, you're going to have to do something, right? Pruning, again, so we've already talked about the pruning issue.
There was one thing that with this I forgot to add in here now that I'm looking at this, but if you start planting in combinations or companions, you can extend that mulch bed to include 3 or 4 plants instead of having tiny little groups together. So when you plant, you know, you may only have, you know, a 2 or 3 foot wide plant ring,
Right.
but you have 4 or 5 plants that are close together. Well, go ahead and just make that a nice mass initially. So,
And my way of laying out a bed line first is very visual. This is a design thing, because your eye follows the line. Your eye follows the line on the ground first. If it wiggles in its walk, you're going to follow it like that. It's going to be a little confusing. My other method, I mow the lawn. I know exactly how I can make that turn and not either run over something or miss a piece of whatever I'm mowing. That's a really simple way to simplify your management.
so we had a question come in from Dakota County again about, they're wanting to know about cocoa mulch.
No, why not? It's extremely toxic to dogs.
And it's
Chocolate.
extremely expensive.
Very expensive. It's toxic to dogs. So no, 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 no. Okay, so know the mature size if you're purchasing and planting. And again, the environment. So just because it's in full flower at whatever local garden center that you're going to visit to buy it does not mean it wants to live in your yard, okay, or in your landscape. So we go all the way back then to all of those categories that we talked about before.
Or it will be blooming at that time of year.
Exactly. Yep. Okay. So is this our design one? Are we going
Yes.
on to turf?
This was the design one.
Okay. So design principles, which we will talk about in depth when we go into our design conversation, will be, we're going to start with all of the big broad categories of design, the big picture things, and then the detail. Always keeping in mind how you are going to think about creating the management plan for that. So my style, your style may be completely different. Doesn't matter. We all start with the same basic order in the landscape. We create the order, the unity, the rhythm. Then we go into the kinds of things that make our landscape beautiful.
Okay. There we go. Okay.
Okay, so we're gonna go into a different category now, and this is perennials and bulbs. And that would be all that herbaceous stuff, which means it dies to the ground and is supposed to come back up, depending on the winter, and depending on what you chose and whether you chose and placed wisely.
Or the zone.
Or the zone. And the same thing with annuals. And annuals, again, they're fabulous. They're a different ballgame. It's really what you've tried. Where did it work? So there's that where again. How did you have to manage it to keep it doing what you wanted it to do? And what do you want? Those are, and the beauty of the annuals is that you get to change your mind next year if it didn't work, okay? Same thing, age and condition of the plants. Peonies, anybody have peonies? 40 or 50 years old that last year got botrytis blight or mildew up the wazoo, right? Because of our humidity and because of environment again. Quality when planted, same thing. You know, the little tiny root mass of a perennial plant is going to be far less able to establish itself if it's in competition with other plants, which means you're really going to have to keep your eyes on it. Same thing, previous management impacts. What happened especially to the soil in the areas where those perennials were? Location again, contribution, same thing, impact on other plants in the area or of other plants. The big one here is trees. Because I think one of the mistakes made from a management standpoint goes back to how big does the darn thing get, or how big is it already? And we forget in our own landscapes that you plant a little guy like this with a canopy like that, 20 years from now, it's like this with a canopy wider than this room. Whatever you planted or thought you had under it to begin with may absolutely be in the wrong growing environment. If you're trying to manage that plant for the environment it's no longer in, you're not going to be successful. Same thing, it's attitude. What do you think about with these kinds of things? The other thing about herbaceous plants is if you can't handle them where they are, they're not contributing, can they be moved? And do you want to move them? And some of them can and some of them cannot. And again, that's a season thing, but I would far rather move herbaceous plants into an environment where they're going to be happy than try to keep them happy where they're in an environment they can't withstand.
And then when you move them, you can share them.
Sharing, if they're not on the don't you dare pass that to me list. And that is particularly true of the invasive or potentially invasive or the watch list plants. So again, manage what it is for where it is. Is it a flat area? Is it a berm? Is it a depression or is it a raised bed? Those are all different environmental conditions where we see a lot of herbaceous plants. Berm in particular, because berms are oftentimes constructed very incorrectly. It's a pile of soil on top of a pile of soil, and that just doesn't work. And again, can it or should it be moved? Just because you have it doesn't mean you should. So then we have native versus introduced. We have exotic plants. There's a difference between aggressive plants and invasive plants. And the true invasive or the noxious list is on the Nebraska Invasive Species Council list. There aren't a lot of them, but there are some. And there are going to be more that we have our eyes on. Same thing on compaction and soil damage. One of the big issues we have in our courtyard is you can't get to some of the plants without stepping into the bed. And the big old boots, or even the little bitty boots, make a difference in the compaction in there. Compost is the best top dressing, really. Well-finished compost for herbaceous plants. Watering, again, nothing really different here, except that there are some indicator perennial plants in most landscapes. And when I'm talking indicator, I mean the ones that are going to say to you by their appearance, they are water stressed. Typically, you'll see that with plants at about 4 in the afternoon. And that's a response to heat, wind, etc. If they recover overnight, they're okay. It's when 2 or 3 or 4 days later, they go into that wilt appearance, they don't recover, then you know that that area of your landscape is in need of additional water. Okay?
So you need to understand the symptoms of overwatering and underwatering when you're talking about some of those indicator plants also, because the symptoms actually are very similar. Really the best way to figure out if it is dry, if you don't know for sure, is go take that screwdriver and go stick it down in the soil and test their soil. Make sure that it's not wet. There are some places, our courtyard is a very good example. In one place it stays mucky wet all the time, all summer long. Doesn't matter how little we water it, how much we water it. 2 feet away, it gets as dry as a bone. And so it's really, our courtyard is really something that you couldn't even put on an irrigation system. It has to be hand watered. The plants have to be individually watered because of the way the soil is in that area. So the signal plant again, and then drought and wind and competition really do make a difference too. Wind will definitely affect those plants. You can definitely tell they will go down much quicker if it's hot and windy than if it's just hot. Humidity will also make and play a very big part of that. So in the eastern part of the state, you're really going to have to pay more attention to that than you will have to be in the western part of the state.
Nutrients again. So, we have an awful lot of people that really want to fertilize their perennial beds or their annuals, which really need it more. But it's the same thing. It's a look and see. It's a soil test. Is it really the nutrient issue? Is it herbicide damage? So, knowing the difference between whether it is an insect, a pest, a disease, or herbicide damage before you start putting nutrients on it is pretty darn important. Weed control as well. talk about that really more in herbaceous beds or in perennials and grasses, mixed areas like that, because it seems to be where you see them the most. You know, a mulch bed under a tree, you're going to see some things, but you're not going to see them so much as you will in a herbaceous bed. And that would be a hoe as opposed to a chemical, typically, because you're going to have to be awfully darn careful if you're applying chemicals in those situations. Shallow rooted plants can be really damaged, so you have to be careful about that. And this is where mulch comes into play. So less mulch, and after watering, you don't put down as much. Again, no mulch against the crown of the plant. You just don't want to do that. You do not want to bury the crown. And again, some of the natives and our heat lovers are going to fail in those organic mulches.
Some good landscape beds too, if you design them correctly and you have enough overcover from plant to plant, you're going to be shading that soil. And most weed seeds usually have to have some kind of light for them to germinate. So if you actually have designed a very good bed and have very good coverage over that whole landscape bed, you're going to have less weeds also. But they have to get big enough. So.
And you also need to watch, and we aren't really talking tonight about pruning your herbaceous plants, because essentially deadheading and cutting back is pruning. You have to be aware of the ones that are going to set seed and go into that aggressive category, and get that seed off of there if you do not want them to do that and spread all over.
There's some that are very happy also. You can control them by pruning or deadheading. There are some that you can cut back by a third earlier in the season to push the blooming back. If you're designing or you're landscaping for a September wedding and you want, I don't know, anemone or something blooming, I don't know, something. And, you want to push it back a little bit further, then you can control them also with some pruning that way.
And again, you need to know what it is and whether it can be managed like that before you just indiscriminately start chopping things back.
So turf.
Go right ahead.
I personally like turf. So I am not the person that's going to tell you to get rid of all your turf. I think turf is the excellent foreground to any landscape bed. I have a dog, so my dog needs to have the turf. I have nieces and nephews. We go out and play in the turf.
I agree with her.
So,
it's the jewel for the setting or the setting for the jewel, depending on who I'm talking to.
But in order to manage turf, you have to know what kind of turf you have. So do you have a warm season turf or a cool season turf? Because it's going to be completely different if you have one or the other. So the picture that we have added on here is, do you guys know what kind of turf that is?
Combination.
You
It
got
is a
it.
combination, yes. So that is a warm season turf that's been invaded by a cool season turf.
So it's buffalo grass with bluegrass and fescue in it. It's on
So
campus, right over there.
I'm going to imagine that this was not managed correctly.
It's very, very difficult to manage a warm season turf in town because of all the cool season turf around, and it gets carried in by the birds.
So redundancy all night long. You need to have a soil test, especially in turf. Turf has a little bit more managed than most of the plants that we've talked about so far. So you do need to have a soil test. You need to make sure that you reduce as much compaction as possible. Every time you go to the shed, take a different route. Put something in your yard so the mailman isn't walking across your yard in the exact same spot. You can reduce some of the compaction by aerating. You can aerate either in the spring or in the fall. Either or works.
Haven't they changed their recommendation on aeration to some extent?
They have changed their recommendation to some extent where they're not recommending it for homeowners quite as much. It's not quite as needed. But it is in those high compaction areas you can do that. So you can top dress with compost. It does improve drainage. just kind of like the landscape beds that we talked about. It does provide the organic matter. It tracks beneficial organisms to help break down some of that thatch and all that kind of stuff. The recommendation is to set your mower at 3 or 3.5 inches and forget it. So always mow at the same time. Don't remove more than 1/3 of the top of the leaf blade off at a time. So if you go on vacation and your neighbor was supposed to be mowing your yard and they forgot, and you come home and your bluegrass is 10 inches tall, then you're going to have a problem. So you're going to have to mow it a couple times and pull your deck up higher and just keep moving it down. And do leave the clippings down. So that is organic matter. That is adding nutrients back into your soil. You can fertilize. I don't fertilize, and I don't care if I have weeds in my turf. So
That's actually, interestingly enough, and this is our turf guys talking about the difference between aerating and fertilizing. They're suggesting really for homeowners that fertility is more important than aeration in most cases. Yeah.
So they're asking us to talk more about aerating, but I'm not for sure what more I'm supposed to talk about.
When, maybe?
When am I supposed to aerate? I don't know.
Who's coming in to talk about turf?
So you can aerate. I think they're wanting to know when, maybe.
Spring or fall?
Spring or
too
fall. You have pluses and minuses on both sides.
Mhm.
You should probably do the core aeration. You can leave the soil plugs on the top. That helps add the organic matter back into the soil. And if you do it in the fall, you could do it early enough, and then you can overseed, and those seeds actually go into those holes, and they actually do germinate, and you actually get a better growth. So, but all that will be talked about when you do turf. So, in more detail. So,
watering practices for turf and weed control. Go right ahead.
Watering practices, make sure you test your irrigation system. Make sure that it's covering in the proper areas. Make sure your heads all work. They're rotating the correct way. 1 inch of water is about what you need each week. If you have a system that has a rain gauge on it, it's going to shut off if it gets that, if it rains. Evidently, it's city law now here in Lincoln that it has to be added for any system now. There are some cool season turfs that can go dormant. So bluegrass can go dormant. You cannot water it. It can go dormant in the summer and come back. Fescue will not.
If it goes totally dormant, it's totally dead.
So you can
Yeah.
thicken your turf. You can reseed or overseed spring or fall. You can do a dormant seeding. Dormant seedings are done in the winter time. So like in November, December, a lot of prairies are done by dormant seeding. You can't just install sod also. So those are way too many S's there. There are diseases, pests, insects, weeds. What is your acceptable threshold? I mean, what are you going to live with? You know, is there a little bit of powdery mildew on a few blades? I don't care.
Which you cannot really do anything about anyway.
So is there, a little bit of fairy ring? Is there a little bit of brown spot? I may live with it and throw some seed out there in the fall and call it good. If there's lots of insects and I'm having a party, I may think about putting something down, but we're all used to mosquito bites and chigger bites. So
if your lawn is filled with plantain, like that picture, you might want to consider improving the soil and the drainage. So again, just like everything else, you go back to, if you really want a higher quality turf, you start with what is it growing in. If that soil is so crummy that you can't really grow turf in it, you're probably not going to be able to grow anything else either.
And turf does not like to grow in the shade. I don't care if you buy the shade-loving turf. It does not like to grow in the shade.
You just stand there with your fingers on the hose if you have turf in the shade, because that's about what it takes.
That's when you buy Vinca and put it down as a ground cover.
Mhm.
So there's lots of resources for turf. Turf.unl.edu is on your list. I'm just going to do a plug for Bill since he's not here. They have an excellent web page. They're adding new stuff all the time. So if you want to go and see some of the latest turf infos and the latest research that they're coming out with, that's a great place to go to. So critters. We all got to see Dennis on the statewide. So he did talk about critters, but it's whether do you want them or do you not want them?
Yeah, and again, it's what do you already have in your landscape? You may have to actually either collect some of Dennis's beloved scat or stand there with your night goggles on to see what is actually wandering about in your landscape in the dark. You're probably going to be shocked, actually. And then it's what do you really want in the landscape? And remember that if you're going to manage to attract it, you're going to get some of the things you probably don't want as well. I happen to like pretty much all of it except for the things that eat my house. And you know, that dead turkey vulture was kind of a surprise. But water is a huge attractant, and you'll get the birds. You need nesting cover, which does include dense shrubs at the right levels. Doing the pruning or not doing the pruning in such a way that right now the robins are trying to figure out which crotches in the trees are exactly perfect for those nests. So some of those kinds of things. We have a fox in our neighborhood. I've seen him on many occasions, and I suspect that he is having a little sip out of the bird bath, which is just great. He's welcome to it.
I've threatened to come over and kidnap him and bring him to my neighborhood.
Well, I'm going to tell him you're coming. You can't have him. So, and again, the damage is the real thing. And this is, again, you've got to walk around and you've got to look, as Dennis probably told you. I took some pictures before we started tonight for our Scottsbluff trip tomorrow of some things. And I'm really shocked at the amount of both squirrel chipping and rabbit damage that has occurred in just the last week. Trunks of trees, all sorts of things are just like that. And again, from a management standpoint, once that damage is done, especially on trees, you have really compromised the health of that plant probably for the rest of its life.
There are some particular plants that you almost yearly
Guaranteed.
have to fence off, especially for rabbits.
Anything in the rose family. Although I will say, if you have Annabelle hydrangea, not in the west probably, but in the center, you never have to prune it if you have rabbits, because they'll do it for you. Take it down just about to exactly the right 12 to 18 inches.
I was just thinking, Elizabeth and I in Grand Island, we have to literally almost fence off everything in the Raising Nebraska landscape because there are so many bunnies out there. There are no predators. They have a very nice home underneath the big gazebo. And if it's not fenced off, it's down to the ground to nothing. So,
and if you have raised beds and you did not put hardware cloth under that raised bed before you filled it with soil, and you're in a part of the state where you sort of a little ground squirrel sort of a thing, they come right up from beneath, and then all of a sudden everything you had disappears down their hole.
So we had a couple of questions come in. What's the best way to kill off turf if you want to plant other non-turf plants? Like, I can say we have a YouTube video on that on Backyard Farmer. You can just watch YouTube.
You can say that. And then they'll go to Backyard Farmer. There are two really methods to do that. One is chemical and one is not. Pretty simple. If you choose to use Roundup, you can round up and plant right into the dead stubble, depending on what you're planting and if your soil will manage it and all those good things. The other is to go ahead and turn it and turn all of that turf under, and then know that you're probably going to have to do that for a while. You can smother. You can smother if you want to. That sometimes is a very effective way, depending on how large your area
Time
is,
consuming.
and very time consuming.
So,
Yeah.
and then, so I'm gonna, maybe the two of us can answer this question, but what habitat do turtles like?
Our pond.
I think it depends on what kind of turtle.
Yeah.
And this turtle in the picture likes our pond.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that will depend on the turtle, but you know, the ones we have, they have to have the water environment, and they like the shade. And they have to have the shade as well, and the water, and they have to have lots of plants to eat, including the ones that we paid a fair amount of money for and put in the courtyard.
and ours are native to
Right. They're all
Nebraska,
native
so
turtles.
they have a specialized diet of worms. So 5 worms per turtle every other day. Okay.
So now we really wrap up with true design. This is where we're headed, which is, I want you to think about this before we come in and talk to you about design. So you know, we've been talking management very broadly. Again, we have an entire degree on landscape management. Let's just start with that. Landscape is a very complex system, very interactive. What you do on one piece comes out on the other piece. But I want you to think about, before we talk about design, what you want to do in terms with your own management of your landscape. Not what you want. You don't want you want to do what? You want to accomplish what? You want to change what? And then as we talk about the design aspects that you can either modify or start fresh with, we will go into everything that you see on the screen. Environment, the content of the landscape, which has been a theme all the way through this, the microclimate, all the soil, all the sun, the wind, water, temperatures, your design intent. What do you want this landscape to do for you? And again, this is going all the way back to how you want it to function. Terri wants turf for nieces and dogs. I want turf for dogs and grandchildren. So that's a physical piece. What is the mental? What do you want to go out into your landscape and be mad all the time because it's not the way you want it? Probably not, but I think a lot of us probably are. So that's the mental state. Are you going to accept what you've got, or figure out how to manage it differently and change it from a design standpoint? The social aspect of it. You know, how many of you are, let's chatter over the garden gate? How many of you use it as your private? You work with people all day long. The last thing you want to see is anybody in the backyard. That ties into both how you're going to manage it, because there goes that big screen or that big fence, and how you are going to redesign if you need to.
Or your outdoor kitchen.
Or your grill. Or your outdoor kitchen. Okay, so the management, again, the aesthetics, your style, and how efficient with your resources do you want to be? So, excuse me, most of us are of the generation where we did victory garden things, and we did it right, and then all of a sudden everybody did things really, really wrong. And I think there are very few people that I know that don't want to get the most out of what they put in. That's really what resource efficient is. You get to manage for an hour, and then you get to sit on the patio with a drink for 2. That's different than the flip. And that's really what we're talking about. Everything from the water to the soil to the plants to the energy you put into it.
It's also the touching the earth lightly,
Right.
and how much resource do you actually want to put into it? You know, there are some people that are on the 6-step lawn program.
Right.
And, you know, there are some people, like I had said, if there's a couple weeds in my turf, I don't care. It's green, I'm going to mow it. It all looks the same to me. So we ended it in just the right time. We have time for plenty of questions. We've answered a handful of questions throughout. I can open the chat box up, Elizabeth, so we can see that. So you don't have to
This one
text
and then
me
this one?
anymore.
I was given a flowering, weeping, mulberry. How do I trim that?
So the question is, she was given a weeping mulberry. Typically, the cultivar would be one called chaparral, which will flower, but it's male. So you're not going to have mulberries. If you were after mulberries, they're going to come from somebody else. The interesting and the most beautiful thing about a weeping mulberry is the fact that it weeps. It's grafted. So what you're really going to want to do is make sure that in the interior of this giant moppy thing, you can take out branches that are crossing and anything that is clearly dead. If you guys have never seen a absolutely in-your-face spectacular, belongs in the movie Avatar, Weeping Mulberry, over to Child D, because there is one left. The other one on East Campus died. I think there's still one downtown. It's almost 40 years old. And what it will do, so you need to know this too, is, it'll weep, and then it'll get a little taller and it'll weep. And then if it touches the ground, it may root, and then it will. Yeah, it's very beautiful. Yeah.
I just couldn't figure out how I was supposed to.
Yeah, yeah. But if it gets all that dead stuff in the interior, which is what happened to the one in the Arboretum, it's done for.
So we have a question from Scotts Bluff: when to prune lilacs?
Doesn't matter whether you're in Scotts Bluff or Lincoln, Nebraska. You prune lilacs within the month after flowering, if you don't want to lose the flowers. If they're great big lilacs and you have issues with ash lilac borer, which is, they love the great big canes in a lilac, you can take those out during the dormant season so that you get rid of that material in a timely fashion for the insect damage. Or scale.
I'll get scale.
Yeah.
We have a question: what trees do well around a half-acre pond? Now, this is Dakota County, so a little bit further north, so I'm going to assume
Zone 4.
Zone 4.
So as a person who's thinking back to manage to design, I would say, what do you want to manage and what is the style you want to manage with before I would even begin to tell you what trees are going to do well. Because I could start down my list and say, well, that one would work and this one would work and that one would work, and none of them would be what you have in mind. So we need more information for those kinds of questions.
So from Platte County, we have a beautiful 20-year-old small leaf linden that has never been pruned, hard to mow under. What to prune this year, wrong, or want to prune this year, wrong or right?
Sure. So this is a function thing to be able to mow under, but you're going to have to lift that tree pretty high if it's never been pruned to be able to get enough light under it, and then the surface roots are really going to be an issue. So,
but you could change that management practice and create a landscape bed outside that drip line, and then you wouldn't have to mow.
Right. Yep. So, and in the pruning, again, if we were going to go into the huge big pruning thing, the ideal is you never take off a limb any bigger than an inch. So a 20-year-old linden, I suspect, has an awful lot of limbs that are going to be bigger than that. You prune only in the dormant season, and you prune properly with the collar and the ridge, which means you need to know what you're doing, which means you need to call somebody.
So we have a question that they have mature lilacs, but they are not blooming. So what do they do to get them to bloom?
So again, pruning is one of the things that can encourage lilacs to bloom unless they are really, really at the end of their lifespan. That would be taking out the older canes, reducing the tops to bring them back down into bloom renewal, essentially. Now you may need to, again, test the environment. If they've been there a very, very long time, they've exhausted the soil. So they may need some fertility.
So the Dakota question was
Southeast part of the
southeast
state.
part of the state for the pond, but the statement still holds true.
Right.
What,
I mean, we could go, oh, it depends totally on what you're after, really. Do you want big overstory trees? Do you want beautiful blooming things? So I can't answer the question without hearing a little bit more about what they want.
any more questions?
Yes.
I suppose cypress mulch would be the kind that compacts.
It does. Oh, I'm sorry. The question was cypress mulch, is it one of the ones that does compact? And the answer is yes, it can.
What about cedar?
Cedar does not compact like cypress does. And are you thinking the bagged? So a really simple test to look at is just look at the bag and see if you see lots of little shreddy things as opposed to chips and things like that. Because some of it is regardless of whether it's cedar or cypress, it's pretty shreddy. I should have brought in a mulch pizza because I have one and it was just one I found. It's not mine. Yes.
My peonies did get all the powdery mildew last year, so is there something I should be doing this spring when they come up to prevent that?
The question is, the peonies got powdery mildew last year. Is there anything you can do this year so they don't get it again? So our pathologists would answer this question as sanitation is key. Did you get all that old foliage and everything out of there last fall? Then it'll be good air circulation. And avoiding overhead watering and hoping the humidity doesn't do what the humidity can do.
Of course, the sprinklers hit them.
Yeah, so that'll probably be an issue. Yeah, but again, as Terry said, if your irrigation system is running early in the morning and they dry out at noon, that'll make a difference.
And you
Hopefully.
should be zoning turf needs different water than your landscape beds.
Yeah.
So if there is a way to either change out the heads or relocate the head so it's a 3/4 spray instead of 360-degree spray, maybe look at something like that
Just
to,
water by hand, but
or yeah. Mhm.
Right. Peonies really don't need much water once they're established. I mean, you think about where you find them. They're at our grandparents' homes and in cemeteries and those kinds of things.
So Scotts Bluff wants to know the date for pruning a bur oak.
Scotts Bluff, the date has passed. Unless it's a safety issue. We really are saying let's not do any pruning between October and March 1st. And that has to do with oak wilt, which is unlikely to be as much of an issue in the western part of the state yet. But we're seeing an awful lot of diseases beginning to come into bur oak in particular.
I'm not for sure what this means. It's from Platte County. Where is the wazoo located in a peony? I don't know what that means.
I have no idea.
So
I don't even know what a wazoo is, especially when it's 2 words. Washington Zoo, I guess. Yes. Yes.
Bald cypress, I've got over, it's like driving over speed bumps.
Oh, yeah.
Just endure it and live with it.
Yes, because those are not, the question was bald cypress has surface roots and you don't really have roots, you have knees.
Breathing.
You've got knees. It's the breathing structure. And what that really means is your soil's really compacted. So ideally, you're going to just mulch over it. Yeah.
I guess, again, with aeration, we kind of said, well, maybe it's kind of optional. But if you're using a ride lawnmower, you're probably backing it down all the time.
Right. Wheel path. Yeah. Yeah. And, I mean, the recommendation, I think, used to be, and again, the turf people are probably going to correct both of us, but it used to be spring and fall, aerate twice a year. I don't know that they're saying twice a year anymore, for sure. And again, mine is, 3 big dogs and 5 grandchildren, 3.5 and under, and me. And I aerate when I think of it, maybe every 3 or 4 years, if I think of it. Yes.
We were talking about getting rid of grass
Mm-hmm.
and Roundup and so on, but zoysia, is that a particular problem? Is it like a cancer?
Zoysia, a particular problem. The question is, do you want it or do you hate it?
Hate it.
It's a real problem if you hate it, because every little bitty tiny piece of the darn thing will root, and the birds love it for nesting material. And Rock, who absolutely loves zoysia, as you well know, probably if you watch Backyard, would tell you you have to go down 24 inches with a barrier to keep zoysia. Now it will succumb to glyphosate, but you're going to have to succumb it more than once. So yeah,
Multiple years.
many years to get rid of it. Yeah.
Maybe easier to move.
Yeah, that's pretty much what we recommend, is just move.
So we have one more question from Dakota County for a pond. Trees that will not damage the pond or water, like not the ones that overtake, like willows or black walnuts that make the water not very good.
So I would, if you're looking for shade trees, overstory trees, my first choice floodplain environment native trees would be sycamore. Wonderful, big, beautiful, strong tree. We do have some native elms, and they're floodplain trees. You could use one of the oaks. It would be swamp white, as long as your soil will not be chlorotic. That would, some of our swamp whites, and that's not native. Bald cypress is a great one. You will have knees that come up, but they're actually going to hold they'll actually help you hold the soil. Let's see. Those would be probably my top 2 or 3 choices for overstory, for the big shade trees in that environment. Black gum, if you really want to give it a try, Nyssa sylvatica. We have pretty good luck here. Not so much as you head east. Be a little careful with that one. West. Black gum, Nyssa sylvatica.
Okay. No more questions? So thank you very much. I want to thank all of our outstate people for these past 6 weeks of Master Gardener training. And some of you will continue on in training, and some of you will be finishing. So thank you very much. And some of you I will see in a couple days, and some of you I will see next year. So thank you.